everybody, Wayne here, also known as Spectrum Econs on the Steam blockchain. Today I'm bringing you another video, and it's going to be another economics video. So what I'm going to be focusing on in this video is price discrimination. So I've already got a post out there where I write about price discrimination. I've got a few examples in there, but that's just a written post, and I like to generally follow up my written posts with videos, and that's what I intend to do today. So I'm going to get into price discrimination. I'm going to talk about 4 types of price discrimination in this video. I've got a few slides, you see them up in that corner there, that I'm going to be running through just to help you out. Most of these are kind of similar to what's in the written post, but me talking about it, again, different people prefer different things. Some people prefer to read things, and some people prefer to listen, and some people like to see things and things moving around. So that's why we got this video. I want to try and get my content spread as widely as possible, and the presentation will be a little bit different. I'll probably say a few things that are a little bit different from what I wrote in the post, and there'll be like a few additional things. There might be a few things a little bit less, but anyway, so let's jump into this video now. So what is price discrimination, and why do we have 4 types of price discrimination? You can see here from the picture, we have this fella here, Ghost Rider, trying to sell copies of Game of Thrones. And why is this called price discrimination? Because he's offering the 6th copy for free. So in fact, people who are buying 5 copies, effectively they're buying 6 copies, the price they're paying per copy is actually less. And this is what we like to refer to as second degree price discrimination, or type of second degree price discrimination. And probably the most interesting from my perspective anyway. But a lot of the time, price discrimination is just talked about in general, and I'll cover off a little bit on the general side, but I kind of like to break down into the 4 different types of price discrimination. We're actually going to only talk about 3, but there's a 4th one I think it's worth mentioning in this video. Also briefly mention it in the post as well. So when we talk about price discrimination, what exactly is it, and why would you want to do that? So when you go out and you buy something, there's a certain amount that you're willing to pay for something, else you wouldn't buy it. If you see something that's too expensive, then you wouldn't buy it, or maybe you'd go and look for an alternative. Or you might go and satisfy yourself in some other way, depending on what reason that you're buying it. So you'd have your willingness to pay for something. And then of course there's the price. So if you actually buy something, so what you're willing to pay is greater than the price. Well, it should be anyway, if you work it through with economic terms. So we assume anyway that what you pay is actually less than what you would have been willing to pay. So what that gives you, what we call a consumer surplus. And if you're willing to pay a very high price, like for example you wanted to buy something, you'd say, I'll be willing to pay £20 for that, and only selling it for £5. So your consumer surplus would therefore be £15. That's the difference between what you pay and what you'd be willing to pay. Someone else might come along and they'd say, well, my willingness to pay is only £3, so they wouldn't buy it at £5. There could be a few people that willingness to pay is exactly £5. So therefore, they're basically at the equilibrium price. They don't get any consumer surplus. So consumer surplus effectively is kind of good for the buyer, isn't it? Because you're kind of getting a good deal out of it. I'm willing to pay more, but I ended up getting it for less. That's kind of great. So what firms like to do is they like to capture some of that consumer surplus. And a way of doing that is through price discrimination. And there's 4 ways of doing that. So let's have a quick look through what they are. So let's start off with first degree price discrimination. So effectively what that means is everybody is charged a different price. So there must be some sort of inside information about what everybody is willing to pay. So for example, if I'm willing to pay £19, I pay £19. Someone comes in, they're willing to pay £10, they pay £10. But again, of course, this is based on the cost as well. So if I'm only willing to pay £1, I probably wouldn't get it for £1 if the costs are much higher than £1. So you can kind of see how that works. So by actually charging people different prices is a way of actually making more money. And this is often done in terms of services, because a key thing about price discrimination is, for example, someone could come in and buy it cheaper and then sell it to someone else. So someone with a willingness to pay, for example, of £20 could buy it for £15 off of somebody, instead of going to the source and paying £20. But if it's a service, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. As you can see here, we've got doctors. So doctors could charge people differently depending on what their income is. And we often see that in private practice. So what does this look like in terms, graphically, in terms of what we see our economists look like? So you've got our demand and we've got our supply. I'm going to use here the typical downward sloping demand, upward sloping supply. So as you've got here, we've got 8 prices. So assume that there's 8 people, all with different willingness to pay. So they all charge a different price. As you can see here, the consumer surplus now is very, very, very small. So therefore, more money is coming out of your pockets into the pockets of the firm and the business. So effectively, what they're saying is that it is profitable, well, potentially very profitable, to use first-degree price discrimination. And of course, people would still continue to buy that service because it's below their willingness to pay. So like I said, if you're willing to pay £20 and it's £10 you'd buy it. If you're willing to pay £20 and you charge £19, you would still go ahead and buy it because you still got a consumer surplus. But with first-degree price discrimination, it pretty much takes a lot of that. So, and effectively, maybe your surplus will be tiny for each person. As you can see, we had the big triangle in the previous diagram for consumer surplus. Now consumer surplus will be all these little tiny triangles. That's what you get with first-degree price discrimination. So that is the way of getting the most consumer surplus, would be through first degree. Next up, I want to talk about second degree price discrimination. Now, I've actually got another video coming out very soon, which I call commodity bundling, that is focused on one aspect of second degree price discrimination. Commodity bundling is a way of doing that. As you can see here, we have companies, fast food restaurants, for example, like McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken, and they sell things in terms of a meal. And if it's a meal, effectively you are getting things at a cheaper price than if you're buying them individually. But the key thing with second degree price discrimination, unlike first degree price discrimination, where the firm is actually charging people based on what they can pay through various methods, second degree price discrimination is actually down to the buyer. So the buyer has control over they pay more or pay less. So you're thinking, why would you pay more when you could pay less? Simply because maybe you don't want these other items as part of the bundle. Maybe you went into McDonald's and you just want a drink. You won't want to pay even like 10 cents more for that burger. For example, the drink costs, let's say, $2 and the burger costs, let's say, normally $2, but you could pay for the meal as only like $2.20. So that's saying it's 20 cents more. You won't want the burger anyway because you just want the drink. There's some people that are going there and they're very hungry, they're very thirsty, want a full meal. So therefore, they would buy the bundle and they would pay less per item. So because the price is different per different customer, that is still considered price discrimination, but it is in fact, the buyer is in their hands on the extent of that price discrimination. I've got a graph here. Pull it down. So here we go. So this is very simple. And what we've used in this graph, we've got different elasticity of demand for different people. And if you've got two very distinct elasticities of demand, it's actually easier to use price discrimination because some people are very sensitive to price changes. So you've got an increase in price, let's say inelastic that would be. Increase in price, they'd still more or less have the same quantity. Whereas you've got other people that are very elastic, there's an increase in price and they just not buy anything at all. And you can bring that out simply by, like, bulk buying is a good example of that. I mentioned commodity bundling, bulk buying is a similar sort of thing. So if you're buying in bulk, you want to have a lot of something. And if you're buying in bulk, you probably want a cheaper price. So if you go to another if you go to another company to buy in bulk, that's a lot of business coming out, is going away. So therefore, they might want to offer them a lower price if they buy 50, 60, 100, 2,000 or whatever it is they're buying, and per item is actually less. Whereas other people, they don't want to buy in bulk. So for example, I may only want 1 or 2 or something, so I'll buy them individually because I don't want 10,000 of something. So I'll be then paying a higher price. And you can actually see that in terms of the elasticity. So if I only want to buy 1 or 2, it'd be very inelastic in the sense that I don't want to have 6 or 7, so I'll be happy to pay the higher price rather than the lower price simply because I don't want an awful lot more of that something. Alright, let's now go on to third degree price discrimination. So this is called third degree price discrimination, but in many ways it's a lot more like first degree price discrimination than it is about second degree price discrimination. So with first degree price discrimination, the seller can distinguish between each various buyer. But with third degree price discrimination, you're looking at different groups of buyers. So take, for example, bus fares. So for buses, they might charge a certain amount for people, pensioners. They might charge a certain amount for students. They might charge a certain amount for children. They might charge a certain amount for adults. So all of these may have different prices, and they can actually do that because when you get on a bus, you can show me a little bus card, whatever, you know, say, hey, I'm a pensioner, I'm, you know, 75 years old. You get it cheaper. Or you have a child come on, you can see, you know, they're knee high, whatever, you know, that's a little child. You have a student, they get a student ID card or something like that. So they can distinguish between the various groups of people and charge them a different amount. And the reason why you would do that, again, it's related to elasticity as well, and also demand too, and willingness to pay. So people that are adults are considered to have an income, so they're willing to pay more. Whereas your pensioners, they may or may not be getting income. A lot of them aren't exactly. They might be on pensions, like I mentioned about pensioners, or whatever. So they may have less disposable income. And again, with children and students generally don't have an awful lot of money to throw around as well. So based on that, they're actually able to charge different prices, and it works fairly well. But in this case, it is actually the firm selling the product that actually controls the price discrimination and not the buyer. So that's a key difference between second and third degree price discrimination. So here we go. So again, very similar to what I showed before. This is shown as 3 different graphs. So you can see they're varying different levels of elasticity. So what you do is that you come up with your initial graph, and you use, again, I'll probably discuss this in another video, how you maximize profit, where your marginal cost equals to your marginal revenue. So that marginal cost, marginal revenue would then, for example, spread across all of these various models, you want to call it that. And for each one, you get a price, different price determined, and that is affected by their level of elasticity of demand. I got more of a detailed explanation in the post. So I have a link to that post, will be at the bottom of this video as well. You can actually go in there. It gives a little bit more of a detailed explanation behind the logic of that. As we can see here, we use the flat line because for the first one, it's more inelastic, so you've got that higher price. So you've seen that would be your adults. And maybe your students, your children would be the second one, which is more elastic. So again, they may not choose to go, they might go with their parents, for example, or take them to school rather than take the bus if it's too expensive. So it works off that logic there, and this is a maximizing situation in regards to third degree price discrimination. Last up, we have fourth degree price discrimination. I actually didn't really know that much about it until I investigated further when I was doing my other posts, because I really looked into the 3 types. But apparently there's a 4th type, and that's actually quite interesting. And fourth degree price discrimination doesn't necessarily relate to price, but relates to the quantity. And a good example would be t-shirts. You see I'm wearing a t-shirt here. So if I bought an extra small t-shirt, it could very well be sold at the same price as an extra large t-shirt. Even though there's a lot more material in the extra large t-shirt, it is still the same price. So the price is constant, but the reason why, the logic behind why they charge the same price, because it might be expensive to actually have different prices. It could be a marketing problem as well. So imagine you have 10 different sizes of t-shirts and every single one was a different price. It could get rather confusing, and it could be very off-putting for buyers as well. And also it's easier to market something, all t-shirts or whatever are £10 for example, £20, whatever, all the same. It's kind of easier to do that. So that's one reason as well. Also the cost side of things as well. Often the material when you're buying something actually isn't the main component of the cost anyway. So a t-shirt twice the size may not actually cost that much more either. So when you compare the other costs involved by charging different prices, it may actually be less. Another example I've got with aeroplanes. Aeroplanes is one that they use as an example of second degree price discrimination often. I don't necessarily agree with that because you look at it in terms of flying first class, business class, economy. First class is a lot more expensive, and people argue there is a type of second degree price discrimination because people are choosing to pay more money to fly, but there's also a difference in service quality as well, so you partially see it. But there's also a degree of fourth degree price discrimination that comes out as well, is that the fact that some people have different needs. So for example, if you have a disability, you have a different need in a sense that you need more attention from flight attendants. You may have a wheelchair and that takes up space, it needs to be stored somewhere as well, and all that sort of stuff as well, but you charge the same price as someone who doesn't have a wheelchair, perfectly able. Again, I think bigger people charge the same as smaller people, unless of course you need to buy 2 seats. So that would be airlines. There's a bit of second degree, but I see it a lot more anyway, in terms of fourth degree price discrimination. And I don't think I have an actual graph on that. Oh my gosh, do I have a graph on that? No. I do not have a graph. Alright, so that takes me now to the end of this video on price discrimination. I hope you found it useful. I kind of like like to explain it, like I said, in the terms of the video, so you can actually hear me explaining through things. But there's a slightly different angle on it in terms of the post. So again, it's worth going back and looking on that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. My next video I'm going to be doing is going to be a little bit related to this one, and that's going to be about commodity bundling, and I'm going to get a lot more in detail in terms of what commodity bundling is all about. So if you like this video, give it an upvote if you're on 3Speak or on Steemit. If you happen to see this on YouTube, I think just give it a like. And also remember to follow or subscribe. Thank you very much.